Welcome back to Double Fries No Slaw. I've got Maddy Branning from the FSView on to talk a little bit of softball. We're recording this on Tuesday night, but if you're watching or listening, it comes out on Wednesday. So the season starts tomorrow. It feels like it just ended. I know it ended kind of with a sour taste in our mouths, but it's kind of crazy that it's back already.
Yeah, I'm super excited. Everyone I know has been talking about it. We're gearing up to have, in my opinion, a great year. I love the ranking that we're sitting at the moment, but the whole landscape of college softball these past few years has just changed so much. But I think the Noles are really geared up to take advantage of that this season. Have a good year.
Yeah, it feels like a ton of parity, just like in college softball in general. Oklahoma's still the team that I think people are gunning for, but at the same time, I think that when you look at, are they going to be as good as they've been with that senior class leaving? Texas obviously rose up. Florida was really good last year. Oklahoma State's a really good team with some of their transfers. I do think it's still pretty top heavy, but I do think it's pretty open. Duke will be in there. Obviously, we hope the Noles are in there. But there's a lot of teams that feel like they could go out and make a lot of noise, which is more fun than starting a season saying, all right, who gets to finish second behind Oklahoma again this year, which may happen. Like they might win it again, but it doesn't seem like as much of a certainty as it has for years in the past.
No, that's definitely true. I agree with you. The losses to graduation for OU is going to be critical, but they do have a lot of good youth in their program. But this is definitely the first time in a few years that I'm like, okay, I don't think we're going to see another Pete again.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
I think it might be somebody different this time.
Fingers crossed. All of college softball will rejoice. All right, we'll start there. So ended this season last year, kind of getting hot late. I know that they faltered on the road in that last ACC series, and then they didn't finish it off. Like too many mistakes against Duke. Duke goes on to win the ACC. Then Florida State sweeps their regional. Looks pretty good in that. And there was a lot of concern around Auburn being in that, UCF being in that. They took care of business. They did what they needed to do in that series, and then just because of seeding, got paired up with that buzzsaw that was Oklahoma, and the Noles weren't, as much as we love them, like they weren't good enough last year to really make a run. I don't think, even though they were playing a little bit better late in the year. But any thoughts about a run or any hope for a run kind of died when you realized who you were going to play as the 2 seed with Oklahoma getting that. But coming off last year, they showed some signs at the end of the year. And I don't know how much that truly translates over to what they'll do this year. But I do think that the way they finished last year, not necessarily in the supers, but the way they finished the year out does give you some hope that, like, man, for a lot of the year, it was a struggle. It was a struggle to just figure things out in general. It felt like they did start to come together late in the year, and you kind of hope they can carry that over into the start of this season.
Yeah, the opening loss to Charlotte, I think, shocked a ton of people. FSU being ranked in within the top 10 last season, comes out, blows the home opener at home, terrible. But like you said, they had a really good late season surge. Aston Danley really seemed like she figured it out. Mimi Gooden came in clutch several times. She performed really well against OU, in my opinion.
Yeah.
The Bass woke up late. Kaylee Harding, Kaylee Mudge doing what they could there at the tail end. But like you said, OU was just inevitable. Sometimes I think if they had been paired up with anybody else in the supers, it may have been a different story. But the season for what it was, I don't think anyone, not even Alameda, expected them to go as deep as they did. So shocking the world almost, making that deep of a run, I think that spells a lot of hope for this season, especially when you had such a great freshman class that has been doing nothing but developing in the postseason.
Yeah, they have some studs at freshmen, or that are sophomores now that just absolutely killed things last year. Before we talk about that, the losses are tough, and not just from a on the field perspective, but like everybody loved Mudge, and everybody loved Kaylee Harding, and everybody loved Devin Flaherty, and a couple of those were here for 5 years because of the COVID year, and I do think that like that is. I mean, it's tough from a leadership perspective. It's tough from an on-field replacement perspective. Like, there's obviously a hole at second base that you got to figure out right now. And there's some holes in the lineup now that your leadoff hitter is gone, and maybe your most consistent hitter in Kaylee Harding when you needed big hits is now gone too. And so I do wonder I think a big question, and it's a long season, right? It's not football where you can be out of it in 2 weeks. It is a long season, but how well Florida State can replace what they're losing from those three. And I don't leave out Allison too. I know she struggled with some stuff late in the year with her injury and stuff, but I do think that having to replace that much, and when Dev and Kaylee and Kaylee Mudge too were hitting well, like this lineup was untouchable, right? Like this lineup was ridiculous. We'll mention Jasoni and Issa and others that are in it, Michaela, obviously. This lineup was ridiculous and obviously the pitching just wasn't there last year, but the offense was as good as anybody in the country. And that is a lot to have to figure out how to replace.
Yes, like you said, the offense really carried the team. They're losing so many good and consistent bats in players like Kaylee Harding, Kaylee Mudge, Devin Flaherty, some veteran arms, and Allison Royalty, Emma Wilson. I know she didn't do too much last season. Maddie Balk transfers to Washington after the end of the season. So losing some of that seniority in the bullpen is a little alarming too, especially after they had lost Sandra Cock the season before, Ali Dubois the season before, Mac Leonard. It almost seems like now maybe the offense will struggle, but I think your sophomores really showed out in their freshman year. Jason Issa Torres geared up to have a great season. I've even got hope for Angelique Bueno. And then you've got your seniors. Amaya Ross had her best season in her career. And Michaela Edenfield had the best season, the most consistent season in her career last year. I think that spells a lot of hope for for this season. And with some of the transfers they brought in, the pitching I think will be able to back up the offense a little bit more. So while the cuts are somewhat deep, I think they've done what they needed to do to cover up that hole.
Yeah. The lineup, and I don't know exactly how coach will set it, on Thursday, and she'll probably change it a million times before we really get to, the end of the year. And she kind of has a consistent lineup because really, we'll talk about the tough stretch here in a minute too, but what you do over these next couple of weeks, it can certainly help you down the stretch, but the way you're playing at the end of the year is really what matters. And so she will tinker a lot and it'll probably frustrate fans, and, people will think that they deserve to set those lineups or set those pitching decisions. And I'm one of them. I won't call everybody out, but I can remember sitting in Gainesville thinking, why in the world is Mimi pitching this game? And then she was amazing. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But the idea of having, I would imagine, now I've not spoken with coach. I don't know. I would imagine you have a lineup with, in some order, Jasoni Beecham, Michaela Edenfield, and Issa Torres batting very close to each other, maybe all in a row. And I don't know if there's a better three hitters in a row in college softball right now. And I don't think the lineup will be as deep. We mentioned some of the losses, but those three together. And could we see sophomore slumps? Absolutely. Could Michaela, you mentioned her being consistent. That, to me, that was what was so impressive before she got hurt, was she was hitting home runs, not quite at the frequency as years before, but she was batting at like 4.4. Like her batting average was ridiculous before she got hurt. She was taking walks. Her strikeouts were way, way down. And then you had like two insane freshmen that were just doing nuts stuff around her. That little, that's certainly the toughest part of FSU lineup. And if you can get more out of other people, great. But if they can get, if they can even get 80% of what they got out of those three last year, the offense should continue to roll.
Like you said, two All-Americans in Jason Beeson just coming off of being named the National Freshman of the Year. All-American Michaela Edenfield, Issa Torres. All of these girls last year broke so many records. Jason led the team with a 417 batting average. She put up 16 home runs, leading the team. Edenfield right behind her with 15. And then Torres doing so much good work in the batter's box. She had such a low strikeout count. So it's either she was going to draw a walk or she was going to get a hit and get on base. And that's just their offense. Their defense is also some of the best in the country. D1 softball named Torres and Beecham the number one shortstop and first baseman in the country, respectively. So while you've also got that offensive core that you mentioned, you have a phenomenal infield on the field right now.
Pitching was such a struggle last year, and maybe that's not surprising, losing Catherine Sandercock, maybe the greatest to ever do it in Garnet and Gold, and Mac Leonard and others too, Allie you mentioned. But we saw a lot of struggles on the mound, some of that due to injury. Obviously, Allison was kind of hampered there at the end and through large parts of the season. McKenna was hurt through a large part of the year and kind of gutted it out late for you a little bit. But I wonder what kind of jump the pitchers, specifically McKenna and Ashton and Mimi too, that are returning. I know they picked up some freshmen. I know they've got some a transfer too. But I wonder what kind of impact the pitchers will make this year and how much they can step forward, because being able to rely on them, the different speeds, right? The more placement from, McKenna and the speed that she brings, the drop or whatever, you get out of others is pretty unique. And if they're hitting, if they are kind of playing at their best, if they are fully healthy, I think the pitching staff can be really good. But that, to me, especially when you get late in the year and, batters go through slumps or just whatever's going on, teams are pitching around girls. The pitching is really what needs to take the jump for me, because I think the offense will be fine. It probably won't be as good as last year's. I think the offense will be really good. The pitching has to get better. And I don't know if you have any thoughts there or not on any of those girls that we bring back, but to me, that's the biggest question around this team.
For me, I'd say Ashton Danley is someone that I'm looking to see a lot of good work from this year. I asked Coach Alameda about it in a preseason presser, and she said that Danley is super excited. She's geared up. She wants to do anything that she can to support her team, and that Alameda said she has a lot of unique people around her in the infield. So having that supportive infield that she had last year, it's so good to go in with that familiarity, to still be pitching to Ed infield, but then she's also been working on some new pitches. She had so much experience last year, throwing over 100 something innings for the Noles.
Yeah.
I think that really put her through the trial of fire that she needed to come in and have an even better sophomore season. I feel like we're going to see development out of Mimi Gooden. She spent her summer playing in the Florida Gulf Coast League, so she's been putting in the work. And then the two senior transfers that Alameda brought in the offseason, Annabelle Widra is a utility player, but the most important thing about her is she's also a pitcher. Julia Absol is primarily a pitcher, so Alameda recognized the problem that you identified, TJ, and she's bringing in these veteran players to help solve that issue, but also to provide her sophomores like Gooden, like Aston Danley, and also her incoming freshman in Jazzy Francic, a little bit of that seniority that they'll need to help guide them. Julia Absol coming in as a lefty from Hofstra, a primary starter last year. She through 33 games for the Pride, over 200 innings of work, and still held a 1.39 ERA. She played against tough teams like Texas, held them to 4 runs, and also Mizzou, who's ranked 15 coming into 2025, to 2 runs through 9 innings. I mean, they lost that game, but that is so promising to have somebody like that for you, who improved so much between her sophomore and junior year. Annabelle Widra as well, like I said, a utility player, but also a righty who put in some work, about 40 something innings for Auburn last year. She's going to be somebody that you can put in as a reliever to take the pressure off people like Gooden, Ashton Danley, and Julia Absol. It's just so good to have a veteran presence in the bullpen, someone who's played in a tough conference like the SEC, has faced SEC batters, and can help out your young girls like that, but also provide you another option in this pitch by committee style. So I have a lot of hope for this bullpen. I think it's really versatile, and I think Alameda knew exactly what the problem was after last season, and is doing what she can to fix it while also developing her youth.
The schedule certainly starts out tough. Obviously, tomorrow they start with Oklahoma State. They play Oklahoma State again, a top 5 team twice in this first weekend. Then they go down to Clearwater. They have Ohio State. They play you just mentioned, top 15 ranked Missouri. They have UCF on that Sunday night. Of course, if there's a Sunday night in Clearwater, Florida State on TV. And then A&M comes to town early. They get a little bit of a break with a little bit of a reprieve with the schedule. Although we saw last year, just playing bad teams doesn't always mean that it's an auto win. So certainly have to take every opponent seriously. But it very much is like hey, we're gonna ramp up and we're gonna play a lot of teams. Some of that is coach's scheduling, and some of that is just the way that these tournaments and brackets fell. And we're gonna find out a lot about this team early. And I'm not silver lining if they don't perform well early. What we found out last year is you don't always have to be at your best at the very beginning. You can certainly, through ACC play, find a way to pick up a lot of wins. But we talk about this. Last year, the ACC is down. They're not as good as they were a few years ago. Clemson Duke, still really good teams, but other teams maybe have fallen back just a little bit. So you can pick up a lot of wins in ACC play. But if you want to get those quality wins to be seeded higher later in the year, if you want to avoid a super regional matchup with a Oklahoma or a Texas, or I wouldn't even hate the one in Gainesville, but if you want to avoid a super regional matchup with one of those top 3 or 4 teams, you do need to take care of business early. And so the season's not all doom and gloom should you come out of this first 2 weeks not as high as you want, not as good as you want, but your opportunity and what you will eventually be ranked later is very dependent on it.
I think starting so strong, going down to Puerto Vallarta, and then coming back to playing Clearwater before even touching the clay of Joe and Graff Field is such a good way to start the season. Like you said, going through the tough stuff part first and getting these, especially these young players, acclimated to what they are going to see. Like Oklahoma State has made the last 5 Women's College World Series, and they're probably going to make it again. They have such a phenomenal team, phenomenal roster retention. I mean, their freshmen that came in last year were absolutely amazing. Carly Godwin had 15 home runs, one shy of Jason Beecham, 51 RBI in her freshman year. They've got amazing pitching. They just got Ruby Malin from Washington and Riley Crandall from Baylor. So they're coming in, they're filling that hole that is left by Lexi Kilfoyle graduating with power pitchers. So not only is it going to be tough bats that you got to face, but you got to figure out how to hit Malin and you got to figure out how to hit girls like Crandall. But that's going to be a great way to open the season. And then you go down and you play Mizzou, who they haven't seen since 2021. This team went to the Supers last season. They played Duke as well, put up such a strong fight, went into extra innings with them, and they've got a ton of girls, including some tough transfers that are going to be extremely hard to pitch to. I mean, you got to talk about Taylor Ebbs from Kentucky, Hayden Sokolowski from Oklahoma State. It doesn't get any easier, but going in and facing these teams, especially out of conference teams, that's also extremely important to me. Seeing girls from around the nation and then going into your own conference play, teams that you see year after year, they're going to be more prepared than ever to take on the ACC, especially with teams that they've got to face. Going to Oregon, playing Oregon State, who's been good in the last few years, playing ranked Oregon out there in their own home turf, playing Florida this year. They're ranked second in the nation, had a phenomenal Women's College World Series run last year. FSU put up a fight against them last year, but they're going to be a powerhouse offensively and when it comes to pitching in the circle. This is starting off strong like this is going to be great for Florida State when it comes to going deep into the ACC and playing teams like Florida that are come up later in the season.
Yeah, I both those Florida games were a ton of fun. I mentioned I took my daughter to the one in Gainesville and then watching the one in Tallahassee with the big comeback, and they just couldn't find a way to finish it off. I was hoping we would get Florida in a super just because we matched up so well against them, and that would just be a ton of fun. It sucks for the loser, but we lost Oklahoma anyway, so what's the big deal, I guess. But yeah, I'm a little annoyed that we only play Florida one time this year. I hate that change in the schedule. Hopefully that gets rectified going forward. We'll see. You mentioned earlier the preseason rankings, kind of where we are. Obviously, there's like a million polls, but Florida State hovering around 10th in every poll, right? So just right outside, like maybe a projection for the Women's College World Series, but it's going to come down to Florida State and Duke. I would think one of those ACC teams will probably host a regional and a super regional. We'll see. I'd be pretty surprised if both didn't. But is the expectation to get back to the Women's College World Series? And I don't necessarily just mean the program expectation, but the expectation for this team, not necessarily, again, the program expectation overall, but is it realistic to think this team makes it back to the Oklahoma City?
I want to say yes. I was one of those people last season who didn't even think they were going to make a regional. I had doubt once they saw them start the season so badly, Duke winning the ACC, but they still managed to get it together, like we've talked about in the late season, really figured it out, hosted a regional, swept the regional, made it to Supers, and put up a fight against the eventual national championship. The eventual national champion. I think this season, with fixing up the issues in the bullpen, your freshmen not being freshmen anymore, and returning such a good offense, I think the run and the hope is definitely there. I was so impressed with how they finished last season that my hopes are higher than ever for this season. I think if they can go through the trial in Puerto Vallarta, go through the trial in Clearwater, regardless of if they do good or not, they're still facing some of the best in the nation. They're getting that experience in early. And I think that will drive them again to do really well deep in the season, deep in the postseason. So, yes, I think a potential run for the Women's College World Series is there. Florida State has shown in recent years that they can get there consecutive years in a row, even with some early season struggles. The 2018 team that won the national championship lost their home opener to a non-power 5 school, came back and won it all. I think this team can do the exact same thing.
Yeah, I think it's really important to just try and it obviously you want to be a top 8 seed for very obvious reasons. If they can be somewhere in like that top 12, so that way if you're the 9 seed, you're playing the 8, right? Like if you're the 10 seed, you're playing a 7. It's not so drastic of having to take on an Oklahoma or Texas or Florida, who we all kind of assume will probably be pretty highly ranked at the end of the year, an Oklahoma State who might be number 4. If you can avoid that, right? If you can avoid that top 4, get into that top 12. Obviously, getting into the top 8 is so much bigger because you host that second round at home. But if they can be in that top 12, I think they can make a run, right? If they get in the 13 seed again, the 15 seed again, that's going to be pretty tough for anyone in the country, not just Florida State. But I think they can. I think they can do it. They have to take care of business in the regular season to set themselves up. Another date with Oklahoma. If Oklahoma's down a little bit and they're the 3 seed and you're the 13, I mean, it's just death. It's death by a million cuts again, right? And not that you can't upset them, not that you can't win, but that's where they need to avoid. They need to kind of stay in that top 12-ish all year, set themselves up well by winning some of these early games, go split with Oklahoma State. Obviously, love to sweep, beat Texas A&M when they come to town, win in Clearwater. Missouri certainly is the toughest. Beat Missouri and take care of business early against some ranked teams. So, Maddy, where can people follow you? Where can they read more of your work?
Well, I write for the FSView, so if you search my name, you'll find me there. I'm at Maddy Branning on Twitter and at Maddy Branning on Instagram.
Awesome. Thank you for hanging out. Hopefully you guys enjoy the season. We'll talk to you soon. Go Noles.